Hey guys, tonight we begin our quiet journey along the Pacific Northwest coast, wandering into the memory of fishing villages that once thrived where mist still lingers and campfires once glowed softly against the night. You listen, you breathe, and you settle into a slower rhythm that feels like waves brushing the shore. This is not an adventure of drama, but a gentle walk through history's forgotten corners, with calm as our guide. And yes, if you tried living back then without Wi-Fi, you probably would not survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I would love to know where you are listening from, so share your location and your local time in the comments. It is always wonderful to imagine all of us scattered around the world, yet gathered together here in this quiet circle. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The campfire in your mind has faded, yet its warmth lingers like a gentle afterglow. You open your eyes slowly, carrying the patience of someone who knows the night has many hours to share. The shoreline stretches before you, winding softly in both directions, a ribbon of silver and shadow. Each step presses lightly into the sand, grains shifting beneath your feet with the quiet insistence of time itself. You walk without rush, attuned to the rhythm of the coast, where sea and sand breathe together in unbroken cadence. The Pacific Northwest coast moves with steady rhythms. Forests lean toward the water, cedars and spruces standing sentinel, mountains watching silently. For millennia, villages lined these shores, cedar homes and longhouses scented with smoke and resin, forming thriving communities connected by sea routes. Red cedar canoes carried families, goods, and stories with the tides. As the tide recedes, smooth pebbles appear, and a half-buried circle of stones, perhaps a hearth, reminds us that some mysteries are meant to ripple quietly through time. You imagine villagers gathering at such a hearth. Thin smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of cedar and fire into the coastal mist. Children sit cross-legged, listening to elders speak softly, weaving lessons of patience and reverence into quiet stories. Salmon roasts gently over the flame, the fire flickering not to startle but to soothe. Leaning closer in your mind, you hear the faint hiss of oils dripping into coals, a sound soft enough to coax your eyelids downward, inviting stillness and calm. The air cools as you walk along the shoreline. Moss-covered stones mark the place where forest meets sand, and towering cedars reach skyward, their damp branches releasing the earthy scent of wood that has endured centuries of storms. Historians note how sacred cedar was to the people here, used for houses, tools, and fibers woven from bark. A single tree could sustain many lives, and communities treated it with reverence, honoring its gifts and resilience. A subtler mystery emerges in early explorer accounts. Carved posts left in the sand, their tops patterned and facing the sea. Their purpose remains uncertain: navigational markers, spiritual offerings, or warnings for passing canoes. Scholars still debate their meaning, and you picture them hunched over dusty books, puzzling over objects villagers may never have regarded as puzzles. Perhaps meaning here was not meant to be dissected, but simply lived, experienced as part of daily life. The shoreline curves toward tide pools that shimmer beneath the moonlight, tiny mirrors reflecting fragments of the night sky. Barnacles cling like beads, and small crabs shuffle sideways, carrying their homes. These pools feel timeless, unchanged since villagers leaned over them to collect mussels and clams, placing each carefully into woven baskets with hands intimately familiar with every corner of the tide. Above, stars move in their slow, eternal rhythm. Centuries ago, canoe navigators relied on these patterns, studying the heavens as a dependable guide. Though the constellations may differ from today, the principle remains: the sky as a steady compass. Tracing lines between points of light, you realize you follow the same silent map once trusted by these mariners. The waves grow quieter as you walk. Driftwood is scattered across the sand logs, immense, smooth, polished by years of rolling in tide and salt. Villagers once transformed these into tools, paddles, or benches. Tonight you do the same, settling onto a broad log and letting the rhythm of water against stone and wood ease your thoughts into stillness. In the distance, a faint glow suggests another village flickering across time. Low-slung longhouses stretch along the beach, doorways open to reveal soft firelight. Figures sit in groups, weaving nets, repairing tools, or resting. No one hurries, no voices rise. Life here, in this vision, follows the tide's gentle persistence rather than clocks or deadlines. Explorers in the 19th century recorded massive shell-midden heaps of clam and oyster remnants rising along beaches. Archaeologists see them as time capsules, layers recording centuries of meals. Some contain broken tools, oddly shaped stones, or artifacts whose purpose is unclear, whispering of practices we may never fully understand. The night deepens, though time feels irrelevant. Your pace slows, each step dissolving tension. Mist thickens, wrapping you in cool embrace, softening the edges of everything. The shoreline no longer feels like a line dividing sea and land, but a continuous, breathing whole. You belong within it, not apart. The forgotten villages remain in the bones of the earth, and the stories the ocean carries. Some lie buried under sand dunes, others hidden in the forest, cedar planks returned to soil. Yet their essence persists. Every wave carries echoes of paddles striking water, fires burning low, voices murmuring in a language lost to you, but unmistakably steady and calming. You pause, listening, and feel the rhythm as your own. Walking this shoreline, you touch a slower part of yourself, the part that doesn't need urgency. The villages may be gone from maps, but they live vividly here, tucked between heartbeat and breath. The surf hums in the background. You let your eyelids drift downward briefly, surrendering to the same stillness that sustains generations. With calm spreading through your chest, you rise again, ready to follow the shoreline further, knowing there are more stories waiting in the mist. The campfire in your mind has faded, yet its warmth lingers, soft and comforting. You open your eyes slowly, carrying the patience of someone who knows the night stretches on, offering hours yet to be shared. Before you, the shoreline winds gently in both directions, a ribbon of silver and shadow. Each step presses lightly into the sand, grains shifting beneath your feet with the quiet insistence of time itself. You move without hurry, attuned to the rhythm of the coast, where sea and sand breathe together, steady and enduring. The Pacific Northwest has long been a land of calm patterns. Forests lean close to the water, cedars and spruces standing like quiet sentinels, while distant mountains watch from behind, patient and unmoving. For countless generations, villages rested along these shores, homes of cedar planks and longhouses scented with smoke and resin. Canoes hollowed from massive red cedars carried families, goods, and stories across the sea, binding communities into networks that stretched for hundreds of miles, alive with quiet, enduring life. As you walk, the tide recedes, revealing smooth, dark pebbles. Half sunken among them lies a circle of stones, forming what could be a hearth. Some archaeologists believe such fire circles marked ancient village sites, preserved by layers of sand and time. Others remain mysteries, perfect rings with no clear purpose. Were they ceremonial markers, or simply remnants of old cooking fires? The question floats unanswered, and that is part of their quiet charm, like waves brushing the shore. You imagine villagers gathering at the hearth, thin smoke curling into the mist, carrying the scent of cedar and fire. Children sit cross-legged, listening as elders speak softly, their voices weaving lessons of patience and reverence. Salmon roasts gently over the flame, flickering not to startle, but to soothe, while the faint hiss of oils invites eyes to close and calm to settle. The air cools as you continue along the shoreline. Moss-covered stones line the edge where forest meets sea, their surfaces glistening with lingering mist. Cedars tower overhead, their branches heavy with moisture, releasing the deep, earthy fragrance of wood that has weathered centuries of storms. You remember how historians documented the reverence for cedar, here used for building homes, crafting tools, even weaving fibers for clothing. A single tree could sustain countless lives, and communities treated it with care and respect, honoring its quiet generosity. Hidden among the records is a subtler mystery. Early explorers noted carved posts standing along the sand, their tops adorned with patterns facing the water. No one is certain whether they serve as navigational markers, spiritual offerings, or warnings to passing canoes. Scholars debate their meaning, yet you smile imagining the villagers, for whom these posts needed no explanation. They simply were part of life, quietly observed and lived with. The shoreline curves now, guiding you toward tide pools that shimmer under the moonlight. Tiny mirrors of water reflect fragments of the night sky, while barnacles cling like scattered beads and small crabs scuttle sideways, carrying their homes. The pools feel unchanged, timeless, as they must have been when villagers leaned over the rocks to gather mussels and clams, placing them carefully into woven baskets, moving with hands familiar with every fold of sand and stone. Above, the stars arranged themselves into their slow dance. Centuries ago, navigation by canoe depended on such patterns. Mariners of these fishing villages studied the night sky, using it as a compass when traveling between distant settlements. The constellations they saw may not align with the ones you recognize today, but the principle remains the same: the heavens as a guide, steady and eternal. You tilt your head back, tracing invisible lines between points of light, and you realize you are following the same silent map they once trusted. The waves soften as you walk, the ocean lowering its voice to a gentle whisper. Driftwood lies scattered along the sand, some logs massive, smooth, and polished by years of tide and salt, like resting whales. Villagers once shaped them into tools, paddles, or benches. Tonight, you settle on a broad log, close your eyes, and let the rhythm of water against stone and wood ease your thoughts into calm stillness. In the distance, a faint glow hints at another village preserved across time. Longhouses stretch along the beach, low-roofed and open to the night, revealing fires that cast soft light over figures at work. You hover at their edges, observing respectfully. Groups weave nets, repair tools, or sit in quiet conversation. No one hurries. No one raises their voice. Life flows here in accordance with the tide's patient persistence, rather than clocks or schedules. You recall 19th century explorers' accounts of shell-middens heaps of discarded shells, piled high and layered like miniature hills. To archaeologists, each layer records centuries of meals and traditions. Some contain unusual items, broken tools, shaped stones, artifacts whose purposes are uncertain. These remnants whisper of practices and lives that may never be fully understood, yet their quiet presence carries the weight of continuity, of generations sustained by the generosity of the sea. The night deepens, yet here, time feels unimportant. You walk slowly, each step releasing tension from your body. Mist thickens around you, cool and comforting, creating a gentle cocoon that softens the edges of the world. The shoreline no longer feels like a line dividing sea from land. It is a continuous, breathing whole, and you are part of it. The forgotten villages remain present, held in the bones of the earth and whispered by the ocean. Some are buried beneath sand dunes, others hidden in shadowed forest, their cedar planks returned to soil. Still, their essence endures. Every wave carries echoes of paddles striking water, fires flickering low, voices murmuring in a language tied to this coast. You pause listening, and though the words are gone, their rhythm is unmistakable, steady, calm, unbroken. Walking this shoreline, you enter a slower part of yourself, one that needs no urgency. The villages may not appear on maps, yet they live vividly in this quiet moment, tucked between heartbeat and breath. As the surf hums in the background, your eyelids grow heavy, surrendering to the stillness that has guided generations. With calm settling through your chest, you rise again, ready to follow the shoreline, knowing more stories wait ahead in the mist. You find yourself wandering along the quiet shoreline, where the morning tide has just begun to slip away from the land. The air feels damp but gentle, and the faint shimmer of the sea clings to the sand in ripples of silver. As you breathe in the cool salt breeze, you notice how everything seems unhurried, as if time itself were stretching and sighing before settling into its rhythm. You pause to listen to the muted call of seabirds drifting high above, their voices stretched thin by distance, almost blending into the sigh of the ocean. The shoreline holds traces of life that has unfolded here for thousands of years. On these very sands, ancient villagers once stepped barefoot into the tide, carrying woven nets across their shoulders. They walked with calm precision, the way someone carries a familiar habit rather than a heavy burden. You imagine them lowering the nets carefully into the waves, letting the current take hold, their movements blending seamlessly with the rhythm of the water. Archaeologists have discovered that many of these nets were woven from the fibers of cedar bark, softened and twisted until strong enough to hold the weight of fish. These nets were not hurried inventions, but patient works of craft designed to endure the pull of the sea. Each fiber was twisted by hand, and each knot carried with it a quiet intention. There is something soothing in thinking about those long hours spent weaving, the steady repetition of fingers working, the whisper of bark fiber against the skin, the soft rustle of cedar strips. It is a sound you almost hear now, as if the past were echoing faintly in the silence of the shore. What makes these nets remarkable is not only their endurance, but the details within them. Some of the nets contain intricate patterns woven directly into the design. These are not the random tangles of function, but deliberate shapes, spirals, diamonds, or repeating waves. Their purpose remains uncertain, and they seem to be more than simple fishing tools. Historians still debate their meaning. Were they markers of clan identity, subtle offerings of respect to the spirits of the sea, or quiet ways to pass down memory from one hand to the next? No one knows for sure, and the mystery adds a gentle hush to the thought of them resting beneath the waves. When the tide receded, the villagers returned to the shore to draw in their nets. It was not a hurried task. They worked slowly, their hands wet, their backs bent toward the sea, each movement steady, measured, like a soft dance. The fish were gathered calmly, often in silence, as if the catch itself was a conversation between the sea and the people. You can imagine the gleam of salmon, their bodies shining like bronze under the morning light, slipping quietly into baskets, waiting on the sand. What feels striking here is not the labor, but the patience. Fishing was not always about the certainty of a catch. Some days the nets returned heavy, other days nearly empty. Yet, in both outcomes, the same patience lingered. The villagers lived by the rhythm of the tides, not the urgency of expectation. To stand by the sea and wait was part of life itself, a reminder that time here was not measured in hours, but in cycles of water, moon, and sky. You find yourself breathing more slowly as you think about this way of life, where patience itself was a form of wealth. On calm mornings, nets were laid across shallow tidal pools, glimmering softly beneath the sun. Water lapped over them, casting intricate patterns of light through the woven fibers onto the sand below. If you pause and watch closely in your mind, you might almost see tiny fish weaving through these lines, as if exploring a gallery crafted by human hands. The nets became secret pathways, guiding both the creatures of the sea and the villagers who depended upon them. From time to time, storms tore the nets apart, scattering fragments along the shore. Some pieces, hardened by salt and sand, survived for centuries before archaeologists uncovered them. There is a quiet humor in imagining that, While modern tools rust and crumble quickly, these patient weavings of bark fiber sometimes outlast even the finest gadgets of today. The tide itself became part of the practice. Villagers learned to read the ocean's rhythms in subtle, meditative ways. They observed how waves folded, how moonlight tugged at the water, and how sand shifted beneath their feet. Each decision, when to cast the nets, when to pull them back, was guided by attentive listening. It was never a battle with the sea, but a gentle, ongoing conversation, one of patience, observation, and quiet harmony between human and water. And so, the shoreline itself became a place of gentle ritual. At low tide, families gathered to check traps and nets, children wandering barefoot through the shallow water, elders leaning on driftwood canes to point out changes in the currents. The act of fishing was not confined to men or to hunters alone. It was a shared rhythm that moved through the village, tying everyone to the shore. You could almost hear the quiet laughter carried in the breeze, light and fleeting, as if even joy had learned to speak softly here. The presence of those woven nets lingers in your imagination. You picture them resting beneath the waves, swaying gently like curtains of memory. They remind you that even the simplest acts, tying knots, setting traps, waiting by the tide, could be expressions of art, patience, and wonder. Some mysteries of their designs remain unsolved, but perhaps the mystery itself is part of the lesson. Not everything is meant to be explained. Some things are meant to be felt, like the hush of the sea against the shore, or the gentle laughter that fades into the wind. As you stand with these thoughts, you notice how your own breathing has slowed, matching the ebb and flow of the imagined tide. The story of the nets does not rush you forward, but holds you gently in place, like the woven fibers themselves. You feel suspended in a moment, both ancient and present, carried by the patience of people who once trusted the sea with their lives. The tide fades further into memory, and your thoughts drift inland, to the quiet dwellings that once stood not far from the shore. Wooden longhouses stretched patiently along the forest's edge, their cedar planks fitted side by side, like the pages of a book carefully bound. These homes were not hurried constructions. They were slow, deliberate structures that seemed to grow from the trees themselves. The scent of cedar lingered in every wall, a fragrance both protective and soothing, clinging to the air long after the planks had been set in place. You imagine approaching such a longhouse on a cool evening. The air is damp, but not unpleasant, softened by the steady warmth that glows from inside. A thin line of smoke drifts upward through a carved opening in the roof, rising like a slow sigh into the sky. The fire within is not loud, not crackling with urgency, but steady, as though the flames understand they are guardians of the night. The light spills gently across the ground, painting the earth with golden patterns that flicker and stretch like the reflections of a calm tide. Inside, families gathered. The longhouses were spacious, stretching far beyond what one might expect, and they held generations within their walls. At one end, a fire burned, carefully tended. At another, woven mats lay spread across cedar planks, soft with the imprint of resting bodies. Children would drift to sleep beside the steady warmth, while elders sat close to the flames, their voices calm, sharing stories that carried the slow rhythm of the past. These were stories not meant to excite, but to remind of where the people came from, and how the sea and the forest shaped their days. Historically, these longhouses were more than simple shelters. They were central places of memory and ceremony. Archaeological findings tell us that some longhouses could stretch more than 100 feet, accommodating multiple families under a single roof. The shared living was not seen as crowded, but as comforting, a web of kinship held together by cedar beams. The fires were tended communally, the meals shared, the nights softened by voices speaking together. What remains curious are the carvings sometimes found along the beams, spirals, notches, and subtle shapes etched into the wood. Some are clearly symbolic, but others remain uncertain. Were they marks of clan lineage, quiet prayers carved into wood, or instructions for rituals now forgotten? Historians still debate their meaning. These small mysteries lie hidden in the cedar planks, whispers that even time has not fully explained. The rhythm of life in these homes was simple yet enduring. On rainy nights, the sound of water tapped gently against the cedar roof, mingling with the crackle of the hearth. One can imagine lying on a woven mat, watching shadows of smoke curl upward, feeling the fire's heat breathe against the coolness of the damp air. Such moments must have been deeply restful, the kind that linger quietly in memory, long after the fire itself has faded. The fire was not only warmth, but a companion. Its glow softened conversations, its light kept the darkness at bay, and its smoke carried prayers upward. Some say the Longhouses were designed with openings above the hearth, so the spirits of the fire could rise to meet the sky. You can almost picture the thin trails of smoke slipping into the night, drifting past the stars, as though even the smallest ember had a place in the cosmos. At times, ceremonies unfolded here, yet even these were not loud affairs. The rhythm of drums, the low murmur of voices, and the swaying of cedar branches created an atmosphere more meditative than festive. The longhouse itself became part of the ceremony, its beams echoing with sound, its cedar walls absorbing every vibration like a vessel of memory. On quieter days, the Longhouses stood as havens from the world outside. When winds roared against the coast, people gathered inside, waiting patiently as the storms passed. In this way, the Longhouses became symbols of resilience, not by resisting the storm, but by enduring it calmly, holding everyone within like the protective arms of the forest itself. Sometimes, traces of past fires remain visible even today, in the blackened soil beneath archaeological sites. Layers of charcoal preserved in the earth speak of fires tended centuries ago, each layer a reminder of evenings where families once huddled together in warmth. To think of those fires, still leaving their mark after so long, is oddly comforting. The past does not vanish completely. It glows faintly, like embers beneath ash. The light of the hearth gave life to small, quiet tasks. Elders carving cedar tools by firelight. Children braiding reeds into small ropes. Women stirring shellfish in clay pots, steam rising to blend with smoke. These were not dramatic moments, but simple acts, unfolding slowly, becoming the very fabric of daily existence. The fire bore witness to them all, carrying its gentle light from one generation to the next. There is a peaceful symmetry here. The cedar longhouse came from the forest, and in turn it gave the people shelter. The fire came from the wood, and in turn it gave the people warmth. Each part of life circled back to its source, with no rush, no urgency, only steady cycles. This balance seems to whisper through time, reminding us that simplicity is often the deepest form of strength. You picture the longhouse now, not as a ruin, but as it once was. Walls glowing in firelight, cedar beams reaching high, mats spread along the floor, the air alive with smoke, salt, and laughter. It is not difficult to imagine yourself there, feeling the warmth on your skin, the cedar beneath your hand, the comfort of knowing that the night outside may be vast and cold, but inside, the fire continues to breathe. As your thoughts settle here, in the hush of the longhouse, you feel a kind of calm seep into your own breathing. The image of fire glowing against cedar, of smoke rising to meet the sky, feels timeless, a reminder that peace is often found not in silence alone, but in gentle companionship, whether from people, from fire, or from the cedar beams that watch quietly overhead. You step softly along the sand, where the tide has just receded, leaving dark, delicate patterns like quiet brushstrokes across the shore. The village rests in calm anticipation. Canoes lie drawn up on higher ground, their cedar halls darkened by morning mist. Each seems to wait patiently, as if alive, steady, and ready for the vast ocean beyond. The morning unfolds without rush, carrying a slow rhythm of careful preparation. Every movement of the people is deliberate, measured, as if part of a ritual older than memory itself. Even the gulls circling above seem quieter than usual, attuned to the sacredness of the day to come. Among the Maka, whose traditions stretch across centuries, a whale hunt is never hurried. It begins long before paddles touch water. Cleansing rituals mark the hours, and songs rise gently like smoke from small fires along the beach. Men bathe in icy streams at dawn, washing away not just physical grime, but also preparing their spirits. The whale is never seen as mere prey. It is a great being, honored and respected. Elders remind the hunters that the ocean offers nothing without reverence. Here, time stretches like soft, unbroken rope, calm, unhurried, and enduring. In the stillness of the village, thin wisps of cedar smoke drift upward, curling lazily toward the sky. The scent is warm, sweet, and grounding, settling over the senses like a gentle blanket. Inside the longhouse, smooth mats hold sacred objects arranged with careful intention. Polished stones carved with designs whose meanings are now. Mysterious bundles of herbs meant for cleansing and carved wooden bowls of water that shimmer softly in the flickering firelight. Archaeologists have uncovered similar ritual objects at coastal sites, though their exact functions remain uncertain. Some stones catch light in a peculiar way, suggesting purposes beyond the ordinary. They rest now as quiet enigmas, reminders of ceremonies whose full significance lives only in memory and imagination. Yet even as mysteries, they speak of the careful preparation undertaken before facing the ocean. A hush falls over the village as the hunters gather. Their canoes, carved from massive cedar logs, stand ready, smooth and polished from weeks of meticulous labor. 6 to 8 men will ride in each vessel, paddling together in rhythm, guided by songs older than any living memory. Their paddles, thin and worn like bird wings, lean against the sides, waiting. Silence among the men is not emptiness, but focus, a calm breath held for the perfect moment. Even children watch quietly from the edges, as if the entire village has agreed to slow its heartbeat until the canoes finally slip into the sea. Stories passed down tell of Maka men bathing in mountain lakes before a hunt, believing that purity of spirit drew them closer to the whale. They rubbed their bodies with cedar boughs, carrying its scent into the ocean. The ritual, whether spiritual or practical, prepared both mind and body, demanding patience and quiet endurance. You imagine yourself there, shivering in cold mountain water, likely calling for tea and blankets long before the ritual could end. The women of the village also hold quiet responsibilities during this time. They prepare dried food for the hunters to carry, sharpen tools, and maintain the fires in the longhouses. They watch the sky for subtle shifts in clouds, because reading weather is as important as paddling skill. A storm could erase the difference between courage and folly. The whole community, not only the hunters, takes part in this great preparation. Every voice, every gesture, contributes to the harmony of the event. Even the youngest children are told stories that explain why silence matters, why respect must guide every movement. The lessons pass gently like tides, absorbed without struggle, as natural as breathing. You pause for a moment to imagine standing on this same beach centuries ago. The canoes gleam with fresh oil rubbed into the cedar. The hunters are quiet but strong, their faces calm as stone. The sea waits beyond, dark and unmeasured, like an open door into mystery. The air carries a mix of cedar smoke and salt, a combination so distinct that once noticed, it cannot be forgotten. You almost taste it on your tongue, sharp yet sweet. Every detail is part of a rhythm that does not rush forward, but circles slowly, like the swell of the tide. What strikes you is the complete absence of haste. In today's world, preparation often feels like a burden before the real action begins. But here, preparation is the action. It is the heart of the ritual, the weaving together of body, mind, and sea. There is no dividing line between practical readiness and spiritual ceremony. A sharpened spear, a clean body, a whispered prayer, they are all strands of the same rope. That rope binds the hunters not only to one another, but to the whale itself, a being recognized as vast, powerful, and worthy of reverence. At the edge of the village, a small drum beats softly. The rhythm is not loud, not insistent, but steady, like the slow beating of a heart. The hunters close their eyes and breathe in unison, inhaling the damp air, exhaling mist into the cold dawn. Each breath becomes part of the ritual, a preparation as deep as any carved spear. You think of how modern life fills with alarms, notifications, and buzzing phones. Here, the only signal to move forward is the slow beat of a drum echoing against the cedar walls. Perhaps it is a reminder that the body itself is an instrument, and rhythm is found in stillness as much as in song. The ocean waits, stretching beyond the horizon. No one rushes to push the canoes into the surf. That moment will arrive only when the rituals are complete, when every sign has been read, when silence has reached its fullest depth. For now, the village moves with the softness of early light. The hunters stand at ease, their minds turned inward, their bodies cleansed and ready. The fires burn steadily, casting long shadows that sway across the sand. The preparations are nearly complete. The ocean knows. The whale, somewhere beneath the waves, may also know. And so the day lingers in this quiet balance. Not yet hunt, not yet journey, but the gentle breath before the first paddle dips into the sea. The canoes lie upon the shore as though they are sleeping animals, their long cedar bodies drawn safely above the line of the tide. Morning light touches their curved edges, soft and golden, while the damp sand beneath them still remembers the night's waves. Each canoe rests in silence, tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to the sea that has carried it many times before. Around them, the village moves quietly. There is no rushing, no sudden noise, only the gentle rhythm of footsteps and the whisper of wind moving through cedar trees at the edge of the beach. The canoes themselves were once towering trees in the coastal forests. For weeks, perhaps months, men worked with fire and stone tools, carefully hollowing and shaping each trunk into a vessel of balance and grace. Archaeological studies tell us that some of these great canoes could reach 60 feet in length, able to carry entire hunting parties across open water. And yet, even with their size and strength, the canoes were treated almost as living companions. Hunters believed they carried spirit, that the cedar itself retained memory of forest and sea. To place a canoe upon the sand was not to abandon it, but to let it rest, the way one lets a horse cool down after a long journey. Along the shoreline, small details catch the eye. A piece of driftwood leans against a canoe, worn smooth as bone. Nets hang drying nearby, their fibers twisted with patience, the knots tied with the quiet precision of practiced hands. Seashells glimmer here and there in the sand, remnants of meals shared by families over countless evenings. Among them, archaeologists often find broken shards of obsidian or bone, tools once used to repair lines and paddles. These traces remind us that even in rest, the canoes were never far from use. Their presence was constant, woven into the daily rhythm of life. Historians still debate their significance, whether as mere tools of travel or sacred bridges between human and ocean spirit. You pause and imagine the hush of such a morning centuries ago. A group of children play near the water's edge, careful not to touch the canoes, but circling them with curiosity. They gather shells, skipping them across shallow pools, their laughter softened by the mist. Further back, elders sit by small fires, steam rising from cedar bark tea. They glance toward the canoes now and then, as if watching old friends sleeping. Nothing feels hurried, because time here bends gently like the tide. The sands themselves hold a history that words cannot fully capture. At certain archaeological sites in the Pacific Northwest, layers of compacted beach soil reveal footprints hardened by time, some belonging to adults, others to children. They tell of mornings like this, hunters, dragging canoes into place, families walking together, dogs pacing by their sides. The footprints are fragile now, covered by protective barriers, but the impression remains, a record of lives lived quietly, patiently, along these shores. You imagine stepping into one of those ancient prints, your own foot smaller or larger, but fitting close enough to feel connection across the centuries. The tide begins to turn slowly, water creeping back across the sand in thin, shining lines. The canoes remain steady, their bows pointed toward the horizon. Their dark cedar glistens faintly where dew has gathered, as if polished by the hand of the sea itself. In the still air, you can almost hear them breathe. The hunters who will guide them are not far away, but for now the vessels wait alone, silent against the rising light. One curious mystery sometimes noted by researchers is the presence of unusual carvings found beneath canoe seats or on hidden surfaces, designs rarely visible to those not in the crew. Spirals, waves, or animal forms were etched into the wood where only the paddlers would see them. Why carve where no one else could admire? Some believe it was to remind the hunters of their spiritual duty. Others think it was to call protection from unseen forces of the sea. The truth is unknown, but the quiet secrecy of those markings lingers like a whisper in the cedar. As you stand among these canoes, your mind drifts into the rhythm of the shore. The breeze carries salt, cool and faint, mixing with the scent of smoke from morning fires. Gulls rise and settle again, their wings flashing white against gray sky. The canoes remain unmoving, but they seem to hold potential within them, like an arrow waiting in the bow, not yet released. They are not only vessels, they are promises, patiently sleeping until the moment arrives. Hunters prepare them with gentle care. They rub oil into the cedar to keep the wood from cracking, polish the paddles until they shine faintly in the morning mist. Each paddle is placed beside the canoe, ready but not hurried. The hunters themselves lean on the sand, quiet in thought. Some tie charms around their wrists, small tokens carved from bone or shell. Others sit with eyes closed, listening to the tide. Preparation is not only for body and vessel. It is for spirit, too. Without calm, they believe, the canoe will not glide properly across the sea. The village seems to breathe together. Children grow quieter. Dogs curl at the edges of the fires. Elders begin to hum soft melodies, not songs of celebration, but of grounding, gentle reminders of patience. The canoes rest, their silence joined by the silence of the people, each waiting for the right sign. Perhaps it will be the angle of the sun, or the shape of the waves, or simply the inner knowing of the lead hunter. Whatever it is, no one forces the moment. The canoes remain still, like long shadows against the sand. And so the morning lingers. The air warms slightly, but the mist clings, softening edges of horizon and shore. You stand among the canoes and feel time slipping into a slower current. Every detail, the damp sand beneath your feet, the faint creak of cedar in the breeze, the whisper of gull wings overhead, feels like part of a dream gently unfolding. The canoes rest upon the quiet sands, not yet launched, not yet called, but deeply present. In their silence, you hear the heartbeat of the village, steady and unbroken, waiting for the tide to rise. The canoes, once resting on the quiet sands, now slide slowly into the water. Their cedar hulls meet the tide with soft sighs, as though wood and sea recognize one another after long separation. The paddles dip, one after another, raking the surface in calm rhythm. There is no hurry. Each motion is deliberate, smooth, and steady. The hunters lean into their strokes with practiced ease, their eyes set upon the horizon where the mist thins into pale light. The Pacific stretches wide before them, silent and immense. Its expanse carries both promise and uncertainty. Ancient records from explorers note that the indigenous peoples of the northwest coast navigated vast distances in their cedar canoes, braving swells and open water to reach the whales they sought. Some accounts describe fleets of up to 20 hunters moving together, their canoes aligned like a single body across the sea. Even with their skill, the challenge was immense. The ocean itself was both ally and obstacle, offering abundance but testing patience at every turn. The hunters row in silence, save for the dip of paddles and the occasional creak of cedar. They know the sea well, yet never assume mastery. The water has moods gentle one moment, restless the next. Today the swells roll slowly, carrying the canoes like cradles, yet each hunter watches the horizon with steady caution. Historians still debate their significance. These whale hunts, whether as survival necessity, communal ritual, or act of spiritual connection. To the hunters themselves, it was all three at once, a way of living, a way of honoring, a way of belonging. Far beneath the surface, currents twist unseen. Marine archaeologists studying ancient coastal routes note that these waters were once pathways, not only for hunters, but for whales themselves. Gray whales, humpbacks, sometimes even the massive blue. The people knew the seasons of migration, when certain species would pass near the shores. They read the signs, the behavior of birds overhead, the drift of seaweed, the shift of winds. Each clue whispered where the whales might be found. The ocean gave nothing directly. It had to be read like a quiet text written in waves. The canoes rise and fall gently now, sliding further from land. Behind them, the shoreline grows faint, its longhouses and fires blurring into mist. Ahead, only horizon, sky, and sea. The hunters accept this distance, for it is part of the challenge. To meet the whale, they must leave the comfort of sand and cedar roofs and enter the wide, uncertain openness of water. The ocean demands trust, patience, and respect. One canoe carries bundles wrapped in cedar bark, offerings prepared earlier. These might be small carved figures or herbs gathered from the forest. Such gifts were cast upon the sea, given to the spirits that dwell within it, ensuring safe passage and fair fortune. Some ethnographic notes mention powdered red ochre sprinkled upon the waves, a gesture of beauty and reverence. Why such rituals mattered is not entirely clear to modern scholars, yet the practice persists in memory. The hunters believed the sea, like any great being, listened and responded. A swell lifts the canoes higher, and for a moment all view is sky. Then the water lowers them again, revealing endless gray-blue stretching outward. A gull follows overhead, calling sharply before wheeling away. The hunters remain still. They are not searching with eyes alone, but with entire bodies, listening for faint spouts, watching for distant ripples, feeling the shift of water against cedar. The ocean's challenge is not only strength of arm or sharpness of tool. It is presence, awareness, the patience to wait for hours upon a silent sea. The morning drifts on. Clouds gather softly overhead, filtering the sun into a gentle glow. The sea surface mirrors that light in slow, shimmering patterns. One canoe pauses, its paddlers letting the vessel drift. Another follows, and soon the entire group rests upon the swells, floating in quiet formation. The silence deepens. No words are spoken, only breath, steady and calm. Somewhere out there, the whales continue their ancient passage, but whether they will appear today remains unknown. Researchers studying oral histories have noted stories of hunts that stretched across days. Canoes would wait in the open water, hunters conserving energy, listening to the sea through long hours of calm and wind alike. Sometimes no whale came, and the canoes returned empty. Other times, a single breath of mist on the horizon transformed the long vigil into sacred encounter. This uncertainty was part of the ocean's challenge. Never knowing, never controlling, only waiting and honoring the rhythms of the water. A faint ripple appears in the distance, barely breaking the surface. The hunters do not stir. They know the sea is full of illusions, floating logs, sudden swells, tricks of light. They wait. Another ripple. This time, the mist of a spout rises briefly, silver against the gray horizon. The hunters breathe in silently, acknowledging but not reacting. Excitement is a wave that must be stilled. They remain in patience, letting the ocean reveal itself in its own rhythm. The canoes adjust slightly, aligning toward the distant sign, yet they do not rush. Every paddle stroke is measured quiet, as though the cedar itself must not disturb the water's calm. The ocean stretches vast and endless, but within it lies this possibility: a meeting between human and whale, ancient as memory, fragile as breath. The sky softens as the afternoon light begins to shift, spreading pale gold and muted lavender across the swells. Shadows ripple quietly over the gentle waves, and the hunters maintain their patient vigil. They have faced the ocean's challenge many times before: the gnaw of hunger, the weight of uncertainty, and the endless expanse of water pressing against their spirits. Yet in this calm they endure. Sitting in silence upon the vast sea is not emptiness, but connection, a quiet communion with forces far older than words, older than memory. The ocean breathes around them, steady and unhurried. The cedar canoes rise and fall with the rhythm of the tides, each movement echoing the heartbeat of the water itself. The hunters, attuned and patient, allow their own breaths to fall into line with this pulse. With each inhale and exhale, they sink deeper into the calm, carried gently by the eternal, soothing rhythm of sea and sky. The canoes drift farther into the gray expanse, each stroke carrying them into the wide breathing heart of the sea. The hunters know well that this is the place where patience is most severely tested, where strength of body is no longer enough. The ocean, even in its gentlest moods, carries peril. It asks for steady calm, a surrender to time that stretches without measure. Historical accounts from early explorers mention how whale hunts often lasted not hours, but entire days. Canoes would rest upon the swells, drifting under skies that changed from bright to dim, from clear to heavy clouds. The hunters sat silent, conserving their strength, their cedar paddles resting across knees. They endured hunger, thirst, and cold without complaint. What seems unbearable to us was, to them, simply part of the rhythm. Historians still debate their significance, whether these hunts were purely for survival or deeply woven spiritual practice. To the hunters, it was both. The peril began with the sea itself. Even the most skilled could not predict sudden storms. The Pacific Northwest is known for mists that can thicken into veils, winds that rise without warning, and waves that climb high in a single breath. A canoe, though sturdy and beautifully made, remained a fragile thing against walls of water. Yet the people trusted their craft. Archaeologists who have studied ancient cedar canoes marvel at their precision, the way each plank was steamed and bent to shape, the seams caulked with spruce root or pitch, making them strong enough to cross open water. Still, no human hands could remove all danger. There are stories preserved in oral tradition of canoes overturned by sudden swells, whole hunts lost in a matter of moments, their efforts swallowed by waves. Such tales remind us of the risks carried in every voyage. But alongside the fear was resilience, a quiet endurance that never sought to conquer the sea, but to meet it with respect. Even when tragedy occurred, the community held the memory with reverence, as part of life's great cycle. The patience was just as immense as the danger. The hunters sat motionless for hours, their eyes scanning the horizon, their ears tuned to the faintest splash. The sea offered no schedule. Whales appeared when they willed, if at all. Waiting became an act of devotion, a meditation upon the shifting water and sky. Modern researchers who have spoken with descendants of these traditions note how the long stillness was seen, not as wasted time, but as sacred. The ocean itself was a teacher, whispering lessons of endurance, humility, and balance. The peril was also in the whale itself. These creatures were vast, heavier than any canoe, powerful enough to capsize with a single sweep of the tail. Ancient petroglyphs along coastal rocks depict whales as immense beings, sometimes larger than entire villages carved in stone. Such images remind us that the people saw whales not simply as prey, but as forces of nature, spirits of the sea. To engage one was to risk life and limb. Yet, with patience, respect, and careful strategy, the people dared to meet them. One little-known detail preserved in ethnographic notes is that some hunters carried charmed small objects tied around the wrist or placed in the canoe. These could be bones of ancestors, feathers, or stones shaped by tide. Their purpose was mysterious, but believed to provide balance, guidance, or courage. Scholars cannot fully explain them, yet their presence suggests that the whale hunt was as much spiritual preparation as physical. Hours pass in the story's gentle rhythm. The hunters drift and paddle softly, then rest again. The sun climbs high, then slowly begins to fall. Hunger presses faintly upon them, yet they do not break their calm. They sip water from skin pouches, share small bits of dried salmon. The sea continues its endless breathing. Patience weaves through every heartbeat. The peril sharpens when a distant swell shifts. From far out on the horizon, a plume of mist rises. Then another. The hunters recognize the whale. Excitement stirs like a sudden wind, but they must not act rashly. A single rushed movement could startle the great being, sending it diving deep into unreachable dark. So they continue to wait, even in the presence of what they have sought. The true challenge lies not in spotting the whale, but in holding back desire, in allowing the moment to unfold slowly. The canoe bows point quietly toward the distant spouts. The paddles touch water with gentleness, each stroke steady and silent. The hunters glide closer, careful not to break rhythm. A whisper of danger grows with each breath, for they are entering the presence of something immense, far greater than themselves. The whale's back breaks the surface, rising with slow majesty, then slipping away again into shadow. The hunters breathe in time with it, hearts steadying. Peril and patience are now inseparable. One wrong move could mean disaster. Yet hesitation, too, carries risk. The whale could vanish into depths never to return. The hunters balance upon a fine line, holding both courage and restraint in equal measure. The sea, vast and indifferent, surrounds them, a reminder that life itself is fragile. Still, they endure. Night approaches, and the sky turns to soft hues of violet and gray. The ocean darkens, yet the hunters remain. Some whale hunts continued into the dusk, the faint glow of fires on distant shores their only anchor to land. Imagine the quiet, the vast dark sea, the slow rise of stars, the whisper of waves against Cedar. Patience stretches across the hours, peril shadowing each heartbeat, yet calm remains. This was the truth of the ancient whale hunts. Not the thrill of conquest, not the noise of battle, but the long, quiet balance between risk and waiting. Between the endless patience of the hunters and the immense peril of the sea. Between human and whale, ocean and sky. Through stillness and quiet endurance, the hunters move onward, guided by cedar canoes, steady paddles, and the slow, deep rhythm of the water. The sea offers its tests, the hours stretch their patience, yet they remain calm and steadfast, flowing with the tide, embracing each moment, and awaiting the gifts that tomorrow may gently bring. The long hours upon the water had tested both body and spirit. The canoes, small silhouettes upon the endless gray, had drifted and waded through sun and cloud, through the quiet rise of waves and the stillness of calm. Now, as evening falls, its gentle veil across the horizon, the patience of the hunters finds its quiet answer. Out on the water, the whale rises once more. It is not the sudden clash of predator and prey. It is not conquest, nor the rush of victory. Instead, it is the slow, sacred rhythm of return. The whale, immense and solemn, surfaces with a breath that drifts upward like a cloud, dissolving into the dimming sky. For the hunters, this moment is not just relief, it is gratitude. The being of the sea has offered itself to sustain the village, and that offering is met with reverence. Historical accounts from explorers in the 18th and 19th centuries describe how entire communities depended on a single whale hunt. Its meat fed families for months, the oil-fueled lamps through long winters, and the bones were shaped into tools and structures. Yet for the people of the Pacific Northwest, the whale was never seen as mere resource. Songs were sung in its honor, and rituals welcomed its spirit into the village. While historians still debate their precise meaning, these ceremonies carried both gratitude and spiritual reverence. The joy among hunters was quiet and steady, never loud or boisterous. They moved with care, fastening lines of twisted cedar, bark, and securing canoes together for strength. The whale's immense body floated still, like a solitary island drifting on the ocean. No shouts disturbed the moment, only the gentle rhythm of breath. Theirs and the sea's alike, a shared acknowledgement that this gift belonged not to humans alone, but to the enduring, eternal cycles of ocean life in oral traditions preserved. Among coastal nations, there are stories of how the whale's spirit was thought to guide the hunters home. Some believe the whale offered itself willingly, fulfilling a bond between sea and shore that stretched back generations. The return of a whale was seen as harmony restored, a promise that the village would see another season through. The canoes, bound in quiet procession, began their slow journey back toward land. The ocean, though vast, seemed calmer now, as if recognizing the solemn passage. The hunters paddled with steady rhythm, their movements synchronized, patient and reverent. Torches were sometimes lit upon the canoes, their reflections trembling upon the waves, guiding the way home. The joy found in the village was quiet and gentle. A hunter might smile softly, eyes drifting toward the shore that promised warmth and welcome. Another might hum a low, familiar chant, a song passed down from elders, carrying across the water like a delicate thread of comfort. These were not shouts of triumph, but whispers of gratitude, subtle reminders that the sea had given and the people honored its gifts. On land, preparations moved with calm purpose. Fires were lit to welcome the returning hunters, while children ran to the shoreline, eyes bright for the first glimpse of approaching canoes. Elders waited with steady presence, ready to guide the rituals of thanks. The whale's arrival belonged to all its return a shared joy that rippled through every home, every heart, and the village itself seemed to breathe in harmony with the sea. Archaeologists had discovered large whale bones incorporated into ancient structures near coastal settlements, evidence that nothing was wasted. Even the remnants became part of the landscape, woven into daily life. Yet there are mysteries still unsolved. In some middens, whale bones bear careful markings, etched lines whose meaning remains unknown. Were they tally marks, prayers, or symbols of gratitude? Scholars continue to wonder, unable to fully translate the language of the past as the canoes neared the shoreline. The first sound to greet them was not applause, but the soft lapping of waves against sand. Then came the glow of fires, flickering across cedar longhouses, casting shadows that stretched like gentle arms welcoming the hunters home. The village gathered quietly, watching as the whale's immense form was drawn to land. Songs began, low and steady, their rhythms echoing the pulse of the sea. The joy was shared yet unhurried. Villagers moved with care, honoring each step. Cedar ropes strained as the whale reached shore, immense yet respected. Herbs and smoke rose into the night, bridging worlds. Hunters stepped ashore weary but calm, their patience rewarded. Peril endured, and hearts steady in quiet gratitude. The night grew soft around them. Stars emerged above, scattering their cold light across the water, while fires burned warm upon the land. The whale, once a silent shadow beneath the waves, now lay among the people as both sustenance and spirit. The community gathered not with clamor, but with stillness, knowing that life had been renewed. Some accounts speak of feasts that lasted days, where every part of the whale was shared, nothing wasted. The oil would soon flicker in lamps, casting gentle light upon winter nights. The bones would shape tools, sleds, even musical instruments. The meat would sustain the people through long storms and quiet hunger. But on that first night, above all, there was gratitude. Gratitude that the sea had been kind, that the hunt had returned in joy rather than lost. In the gentle flicker of firelight, elders shared their stories. Children leaned close, eyelids heavy with sleep, listening to tales of whale hunts long past, lessons of patience, care, and respect flowing between each word. The voices of the old blended seamlessly with the gentle rhythm of the waves, forming a lullaby that belonged equally to land and sea. The return of the whale was never a fleeting moment of celebration, but a quiet affirmation of continuity. It reminded the villagers that they and the ocean lived together, bound by tides, seasons, patience, and reverence. With the whale's return, a sense of peace settled over the village as night deepened. Fires glowed softly, meals awaited, and hearts grew calm. Beyond the shore, the sea stretched vast and eternal. But here, in the warmth of community and the rhythm of waves, joy lay gently, like a soft blanket over the night. Along the long stretches of sand, where waves rolled in with unhurried rhythm, driftwood gathered like gentle offerings from the sea. Each piece, smoothed by tide and time, carried its own quiet story. Some were great trunks, worn pale by salt and sun, while others were small branches, curled like sleeping animals. The people of the coastal villages saw in these remnants not waste, but gifts, silent companions that arrived with the ocean's breath. When morning mist clung to the shoreline, villagers would walk slowly among the washed-up shapes. They bent down to examine the wood, tracing lines smoothed by countless seasons. Children sometimes followed, their small footprints pressing beside the larger ones, curious about what each driftwood piece might become. A branch could serve as kindling for evening fires. A larger trunk might be shaped into tools or even the beginnings of a canoe. And sometimes the driftwood was left as it was, simply admired for its quiet form. A sculpture carved not by human hand, but by the sea itself. Historical. Records from the 19th century describe how driftwood was an essential material for coastal life. Cedar was the most cherished, though it often had to be gathered from far away or accepted when the ocean delivered it. Explorers noted that villagers treated large driftwood logs as if they had traveled on a pilgrimage, carried across distances. Beyond sight, the logs might rest for weeks on the shore before being moved, their presence a reminder of nature's slow, dependable generosity. Yet there are mysteries, too. Some driftwood logs found in ancient sites bear carvings, subtle etchings of spirals, waves, or figures that do not match known styles of local artwork. Archaeologists debate whether these markings were practical identifiers, spiritual symbols, or perhaps even accidental impressions left by ropes and nets. Historians still debate their meaning, but the unanswered questions only add to the dreamlike quality of driftwood. Half object, half story, the villagers gathered the wood with patience. Canoes were sometimes drawn to the shore, their hulls resting gently against the sand, while groups worked together to lift larger pieces. Ropes made of twisted cedar bark or kelp would be tied around the logs, and with quiet strength, the community moved them slowly, step by step, into the village. There was no rush. The driftwood had already traveled far. It could wait a little longer. In the soft glow of late afternoon, Driftwood often became the center of gathering. Long benches, carved from wide trunks, stood near the fires where elders spoke. Smaller pieces, set carefully in rings, formed makeshift hearths for cooking or warmth. Children played along the beach, building forts and miniature houses from branches and sticks. In their hands, driftwood transformed into boats for shallow pools or guardians for sand villages that vanished with the tide, the firelight revealed. Another story. Driftwood burned with a distinctive brightness, flames curling higher, casting shadows that danced upon longhouse walls. It was said that wood carried the memory of its journey, and when set alight, it released whispers of distant shores. Whether this was belief or simply poetry, the sight of driftwood fires became a comfort, their warmth binding the people to both land and sea. Travelers noted in their journals that along the Pacific Northwest, driftwood often piled so high on certain shores that it created barriers, almost forests upon the beach. These tangled stacks became landmarks, places where villages might mark paths or leave offerings. And among the wood, stories grew of spirits walking at dusk, of ancestors sending messages through the sea's deliveries. In this way, the shoreline became not just a place of gathering, but also of imagination. When storms passed, the sands would change again. New logs, freshly torn from distant coasts, would arrive, heavy and dark. They bore the scent of rain and salt, a reminder of the sea's untamed power. Yet in the days that followed, as sun and wind dried them, they too softened, joining the quiet congregation along the shore. The joy found in driftwood was never in spectacle, but in its quiet patience. It did not shout or demand attention, yet it offered a steady presence along the shoreline. The villagers understood that the sea, even in its silence, always gave. Whale hunts provided sustenance and survival, but the driftwood offered something more subtle, a sense of stability, warmth, and the comforting rhythm of everyday life. Together, these gifts, the grand and the humble, the dramatic and the ordinary, wove the balance that shaped life by the ocean dot in the soft evenings. Families would gather upon these logs, their eyes tracing the horizon where water met sky. They allowed their thoughts to drift with the ebbing tide, the gentle murmur of waves mingling with the distant crackle of fires. Driftwood beneath their hands and legs was smooth and cool, grounding them in the present while whispering tales of unseen journeys. Each piece was a quiet companion, connecting the people to the vastness of sea and the constancy of the shore. And so, stories grew like moss upon the wood. Elders told tales of giant trees that once stood at the world's edge, falling into the ocean and returning as guardians of the shore. Children imagined the logs as sleeping sea creatures, waiting for the moment to awaken and swim away. Each piece of wood was more than a fragment. It was a companion, a thread in the weaving of coastal life dot in the hush of twilight. As smoke rose softly above the longhouses, villagers looked to the piles of driftwood along the beach. They saw not just logs, but time itself, patient, enduring, softened by the sea. The fires burned with steady light, and above them the stars unfolded like countless grains of sand upon the night sky. Here, by the shore, joy was not loud but calm. Driftwood lay quietly upon the sands, stories resting within its grain, waiting for hands, eyes, and hearts to bring them alive once more. And as the waves rolled in and out, the people knew that tomorrow, or the next day, or the one after, more wood would arrive, carrying new secrets from the ocean's wide embrace. So the village slept soundly, the shore lined with gentle guardians of salt and cedar, their presence timeless and still. From the still shore, where driftwood lay scattered like patient guardians, narrow trails began to wind away from the water's edge. These paths, worn yet enduring, carried travelers from the brightness of tide and sand into the cool embrace of the forest. To step upon them was to shift into another rhythm slower, quieter. As if the trees themselves asked for silence and attention, the air changed almost at once. The sharp breath of salt receded, replaced by the deep fragrance of cedar, spruce, and hemlock. Branches arched overhead, weaving a shelter that softened the world beneath. Moss hung in long green veils, and ferns unfurled at the roots of ancient trunks. Where sunlight pierced the canopy, it arrived only in fragments, golden shards that shimmered upon damp soil, or caught in the ripples of narrow streams. Along these shaded paths, the villagers had walked for countless generations, their steps light, their journeys never rushed. The trails were not merely passageways, but gentle corridors of memory and belonging. History records that ancient, coastal communities relied deeply on these forests. The trees provided not only wood for homes and canoes, but also bark for ropes and fibers, pitch for ceiling, and berries, roots, and medicinal plants. Archaeological finds reveal storage pits and cooking stones tucked along these woodland paths, reminders that daily life moved gently between ocean and forest. Each path was not simply a trail, but a living thread, binding the sea to the inland earth. Yet mysteries endure here as well. Some forest clearings discovered by researchers show signs of repeated burning, though no village remains nearby. The purpose of these fires is uncertain. Were they for hunting, ritual, or simply to renew the forest floor? Historians still debate their meaning, but the unanswered question adds a quiet wonder to the hush beneath the branches. The villagers themselves walked with care. Often they carried woven baskets filled with dried fish or berries, balanced lightly upon their backs. They paused often, listening to the calls of distant birds, or to the rustling of deer moving gently among the ferns. These were not hurried paths of commerce or conquest. They were calm passages where time seemed to slow until every breath matched the rhythm of the forest. Along some stretches, the roots of ancient cedars rose like steps, polished smooth by centuries of feet. Children learned to walk carefully here, balancing as if on bridges woven by the trees themselves. The forest canopy above muffled sound, so that even laughter softened into whispers. In the stillness, only the sound of dripping water or the creak of a leaning trunk broke the silence. Elders often said that these paths remembered every journey. To walk them was to join with ancestors who had once carried bundles of wood, or guided canoes' timbers, or gathered herbs at the right season. The ground was soft, layered with centuries of needles, a natural carpet that gave each step a hushed weightlessness. Travelers might pause beside a cedar to place a hand upon its bark, feeling the grooves as though greeting an old friend. Historical journals from explorers note that these coastal forests were unlike any others. They had seen dense, towering, and filled with a sense of permanence. Some trees were so wide at the base that 5 or 6 people could stand hand in hand to encircle them. Yet the villagers did not seek to conquer such giants. Instead, they lived with them, taking only what was needed, leaving the rest to stand. As silent elders dot, it was said that some paths glowed faintly at dusk, as moss upon fallen logs caught the last traces of daylight. Children believed that spirits of the forest marked the way, while adults smiled quietly, accepting mystery as part of life. The forest did not need to explain itself. It only asked that one walk slowly, breathing deeply, listening carefully. Sometimes gathered in small clearings, spreading mats woven of reeds. There they shared meals, roasted roots, berries, dried salmon brought from the shore. Fires were small, made from fallen twigs, their smoke rising gently without disturbing the canopy. Even in gatherings, voices remained soft, shaped by the calm of the forest itself. And when rain came, as it often did, the forest transformed again. Drops tapped gently on cedar needles, collecting and falling in rhythm like the slow plucking of a harp. Travelers pulled cloaks close, but they did not rush. The rain cooled the air, deepened the sense of earth and bark, and turned the trail into a shimmering thread of darkened soil. Here, patience was part of every step, and comfort was found in surrendering to the natural pace. The people knew the paths by heart, yet each walk revealed something new. A cluster of mushrooms appearing overnight on a rotting log. A deer pausing, ears lifted, before vanishing deeper into shadow. A raven perched above, its feathers shining with sudden shafts of sunlight. All these moments, quiet and unremarkable in their simplicity, wove into the larger story of the forest dot at night. When the fires on the shore flickered, these forest trails rested in darkness. Yet even unseen, they remained alive streams flowing. Owls calling, moss growing in silence. Elders told stories that at night the paths were walked by ancestors and spirits, their invisible steps weaving protection over the villages. The forest was not empty. It was simply more still than human ears could perceive. From the driftwood-strewn shores to the shaded groves of the forest, life unfolded in a rhythm that never broke, only shifted. The ocean gave its endless gifts of food and song, while the forest offered shelter, wood, and stillness. Between these two realms lay the trails ancient, patient, and familiar, pressed into the earth by countless generations. To walk upon them was never an act of conquest, but of return, a quiet acknowledgement that sea, land, and people belonged to one another in enduring harmony. Each step led deeper into cedar and spruce, where cool air mingled with the murmur of streams. Time seemed to pause, listening in the stillness. The ancient paths wound patiently through the forest, carrying both memory and promise, welcoming every traveler as part of the same enduring journey between past and tomorrow. From the hush of the forest, where cedar paths wound endlessly beneath green shadows, the trail began its slow descent toward the waiting sea. With each step, the air shifted lighter, salt-touched, alive with the faint murmur of distant surf. Soon the trees parted, and before the traveler stretched the wide open shoreline, its sands glimmering beneath the breath of tide and sky. The ocean moved with no haste, yet it was never still. Its rhythm was eternal, as steady as the heartbeat of the earth. Twice each day the waters advanced, folding rocks and sands into their cool embrace. Twice they withdrew, revealing shallow pools that sparkled with hidden shells and darting life. From the deep, those who lived here learned to shape their days around this rhythm. Work, rest, gathering, and reflection all followed the gentle rise and fall of the sea, a timeless cadence that gave both structure and serenity to every life. Along the coast. History tells us that entire villages along the Pacific Northwest timed their lives to these tidal movements. Fishing expeditions, clam digging, seaweed gathering, all were dictated not by the clock, but by the quiet pull of the moon and the steady whisper of the tide. Archaeologists have uncovered tidal fish traps' intricate stone arrangements, built to catch fish as the water withdrew. These silent structures, some thousands of years old, remain visible at low tide, bearing witness to the wisdom of those who lived in harmony with the sea. And yet, not all can be explained. In certain coves, researchers found circular patterns of stones whose purpose remains a mystery. Were they markers for ceremonies, navigational aids, or simply shapes left by natural forces? Historians still debate their meaning, and the unanswered questions drift like the tides themselves, present, steady, and softly elusive dot as the water ebbed. Children wandered along the sand, their feet leaving momentary prints that the next wave would erase. They leaned over tide pools, watching tiny crabs scuttle beneath seaweed or starfish stretch quietly across the rocks. Every pool was a small world, a mirror of the larger ocean, holding within it the quiet secrets of the deep. The villagers moved, without urgency, their lives unfolding in harmony with the shifting sea. Some bent to gather shells that glistened like fragments of the moon, while others collected seaweed to dry, its salt-sweet scent clinging to their hands. Children paused to watch seabirds rise and circle on the wind before settling once more along the water's edge. Every task followed the ocean's rhythm. When the tide receded, the beach opened wide, offering treasures in sand and stone. When the tide returned, those gifts were drawn gently back into the water's embrace. None resisted, for all understood that the sea gave and reclaimed in equal measure, and peace came from honoring that balance. The sounds of the shoreline were a constant comfort. Waves lapped softly against driftwood, their murmurs carrying a rhythm more tender than speech. At times, winds stirred the water into a deeper roar, yet even then it remained steady, never harsh, never jarring. Families rested in its music, allowing the ocean's song to ease their thoughts into calmness. At night, when firelight flickered behind them, they listened as the incoming tide erased the day's traces, leaving only quiet in its wake. Historical accounts recall how elders could read the tides with remarkable accuracy long before charts or instruments existed. By observing the moon's ascent, the shifting color of the horizon, and the restless patterns of seabirds, they knew precisely when waters would rise or fall. It was not science as later defined, but intimacy knowledge born of centuries of watching, listening, and remembering. At certain times of year, the tides revealed even more. Shell-midden heaps of discarded shells from centuries of meals emerged from the sand, quiet archives of lives lived long ago. To stumble upon them was to see both the past and present at once, the remains of countless gatherings, and the continuation of a rhythm that still guided the living. And still, the tide carried mystery. Some evenings, strange lights were said to flicker upon the water bioluminescence, glowing faintly as though stars had fallen into the sea. Children believed they were spirits of fish. Elders called them gifts of the ocean's breath. Scientists now call it plankton, yet the wonder remains unchanged. Even the smallest glow upon a dark shore was enough to remind all who watched that the sea held secrets beyond understanding. The villagers accepted these wonders quietly, never seeking to solve them, but simply folding them into the rhythm of daily life. To rise with the tide, to rest as it fell, was to join an eternal cycle. In this way, sleep itself mirrored the sea, each night a withdrawal, each morning a return, each breath a gentle echo of the ocean's endless flow. At times, when storms drifted far out at sea, their distant power would press upon the shoreline, sending tides higher than usual, edging closer to the longhouses and fire pits. Yet within the village there was no alarm. Homes stood upon raised ground, built with the wisdom of generations who had studied the sea's shifting moods. The rising water was not seen as a threat, but as a reminder that everything in life moved in cycles, and that patience, more than resistance, was the true way of living beside the ocean. As twilight deepened, the shoreline seemed to soften, the foam tracing slower patterns across the sand. Waves darkened under the growing night, carrying upon their surfaces the silver glow of a climbing moon. The tide no longer surged, but breathed more gently, as if it too prepared for rest. Families lingered at the edge of the water, watching its slow advance, before turning back toward the safety of cedar walls, confident that the ocean's work would continue long after their fires dimmed. The forest had given them stillness through the day, while the tide now offered rhythm through the night. Together, these gifts wove the calm that carried each life, each season, along the coast. And as the tide repeated its ancient song upon the shore, the people inhaled and exhaled in time with it, surrendering to the quiet union of sea and sky. After the tide had whispered its farewell to the shore, and the moon's reflection softened upon the darkened waters, the people returned once more to the center of their quiet lives, the fire. The fireside was not just a place of warmth. It was the gentle heart of the village, where the rhythm of daily life slowed into stillness and where the simplest tools of living became part of a larger harmony. The Longhouses, lined with cedar planks and filled with the faint scent of smoke, held fires at their center. Around them, objects of daily calm rested within reach: carved wooden ladles, woven cedar bark mats, stone grinding bowls smoothed by countless hands. Each tool carried history, not in grand inscriptions, but in the gentle wear of daily use. To sit by the fire was to sit among these quiet companions, reminders of lives lived with patience. Historians have noted that hearths were the center of community, places where food, stories, and rituals converged. Archaeological digs along the Pacific Northwest have uncovered cooking stones blackened by fire, preserved for centuries beneath layers of earth. Some stones still bore faint marks of charring, as though the fire had been extinguished only yesterday. These findings remind us how enduring the fireside was, how deeply it shaped the lives of those who gathered there. And yet, some discoveries remain unexplained. In a handful of sites, archaeologists found carefully arranged circles of smaller stones near the hearths, as though they had once marked a ritual or a symbolic boundary. Their purpose is still uncertain. Historians still debate their meaning, and so these circles sit in silence, like small echoes of forgotten ceremonies, gently hinting at lives lived with layers of mystery. The fire burned steadily, never roaring, never rushing. Around it, villagers prepared their evening meals with unhurried hands. Dried salmon hung on wooden racks, slowly warming in the smoke. Cedar bark baskets carried roots and berries gathered earlier in the day. Stone mortar ground seeds into soft powders, their grinding stones moving in circular rhythm. There was no haste, for the tide had set the pace, and the fire only asked for patience. Children watched the flames, their eyes reflecting the golden glow. Elders leaned upon carved staffs, their voices soft, telling stories that meandered without urgency. Some stories were memories, others quiet lessons, and some were simply gentle musings upon the stars. In such moments, the tools of daily calm were not only physical objects, but also the words, the pauses, and the silences shared by all history records that cedar was the lifeblood of these coastal villages. Cedar provided planks for houses, fibers for ropes, bark for mats, and wood for cooking utensils. Each tool, however humble, was treated with respect. A simple ladle carved from cedar could last for generations, passed quietly from hand to hand, gaining a polish from years of touch. To modern eyes, these objects may appear ordinary, yet to those who lived among them, they were as essential as breath itself. Beside the fire, women wove mats with careful, practiced motions. A sound of fibers rubbing together blended with the soft crackle of burning wood. Mats were used for sleeping, for sitting, and for lining the walls, each one bearing subtle patterns. Some designs were purely functional, others decorative. But every weave carried time within it, a slow dedication that mirrored the calm of the flames. Men tended tools for fishing or carving, checking the edges of bone-tipped hooks or smoothing the handles of paddles. The glow of the fire made their movements steady and thoughtful, as though each stroke of the hand was in conversation with the firelight itself. These tools, used by day upon the sea, rested by night beside the hearth, waiting for the next tide to summon them. At times, the fire itself became part of ritual. Special stones, heated in the flames, were placed into cedar containers to warm water for cleansing ceremonies. Smoke from particular woods was believed to carry prayers upward, curling slowly toward the rafters and beyond into the sky. In these moments, the ordinary became sacred, and the tools of daily life crossed quietly into the realm of the spiritual. And yet, alongside this sacredness, there was always gentleness. The fire never demanded, only offered. Its glow welcomed all, whether weary from work, playful in youth, or reflective in age. To sit before was to be embraced by stillness, and to handle the simple tools of daily life was to be reminded of the balance between effort and rest. Even the sound of the fire was calming. The faint pop of resin, the whisper of smoke escaping through the roof, the steady hum of coals all became a lullaby for those drifting into sleep. Archaeologists suggest that the consistent presence of fire, day and night, created a sense of unbroken continuity for the people, anchoring them to both earth and sky. Mystery, too, flickered within the flames. Some charred remains of unknown plants have been found near ancient hearths, suggesting the use of herbs in ways still unclear. Were they medicines, offerings, or flavors, once common but now forgotten? The record is silent, leaving us with a gentle question mark, glowing softly like embers in the dark dot as night deepened. The fire grew lower, its flames folding into quiet coals. Families lay upon their mats, listening as the fire whispered in its fading voice. Tools were set aside, resting where they would be found again at dawn. The longhouse exhaled in slow unison, filled with the quiet of dreams. The sea had given rhythm, the forest had given shelter, and now the fire gave warmth and calm. Around it, the simple tools of life stood not as objects of labor, but as companions in rest, steady presences that carried the past gently into the present. To live beside the fire was to live within the heart of time itself, slow, steady, endlessly patient. And so, beneath the cedar roofs, with flames glowing softly and tools resting quietly, the people surrendered once more to the night. There, breaths rose and fell in rhythm with the tide, their thoughts slowed into stillness, and sleep gathered them into its calm embrace. As the fires within the longhouses dimmed into gentle embers, life along the shoreline found its way toward another gathering place, the quiet markets of the shore. These markets were not bustling in the way we imagine today, with clamor and haste, but rather unfolded like the slow tide itself, steady and unhurried, marked by gestures of trust and the rhythm of calm voices. The markets arose naturally along the packed sands where ocean met land, often near the mouths of rivers where canoes could easily glide ashore. Driftwood framed their edges, and tall cedar poles marked the spaces where mats were laid out to display the goods. The sound of gulls calling above and the lapping of waves below were as much part of the market as the goods themselves. Historical records suggest that trade along the Pacific Northwest coast reached far beyond daily needs, linking villages separated by many miles of water and forest. Canoes carried dried salmon, whale oil, cedar mats, and finely carved tools, items that were practical yet also symbolic. To exchange them was to affirm trust, to honor kinship, and to strengthen bonds that stretched across generations. As some historians gently remind us, trade in these coastal worlds was never only about resources. It was just as much about relationships. Amid this steady rhythm of commerce lies a quieter mystery. Archaeologists have uncovered shells, stones, and artifacts that originated hundreds of miles away from certain coastal sites. Their presence suggests an intricate web of movement, where goods may have traveled by canoe across open waters, or perhaps passed gradually from hand to hand, village to village, until they reached distant shores. Some may have been exchanged at great gatherings, now softened by time's forgetting, though the exact routes remain partly hidden like faint tracks, washed smooth by the tide. They remind us how deeply these villages once flowed into one. Another dot at dawn, women spread woven mats upon the sand, their fibers still carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke from the longhouse fires. Upon these mats they placed small baskets filled with berries gathered from the forest, roots carefully cleaned and dried, and bundles of herbs tied with grass cords. The arrangement was simple, but the care was evident. Each basket was both an offering and an invitation. Men arrived with carved wooden implements, bone fishhooks polished smooth, and paddles whose handles shone from long use. Children carried smaller bundles, proud to contribute their part. There was no shouting of prices, no frantic bargaining, only soft exchanges. An elder offering a basket of dried clams for a length of woven cord, or a fisherman trading surplus salmon for berries. He could not gather himself. The quiet market was a place where patience was the only currency. Those who came lingered, speaking slowly, often pausing to let the waves fill the silence. Trade was as much about conversation as exchange. News traveled here, too not in proclamations, but in gentle retellings of tides, seasons, and family happenings. In this way, the shoreline became not only a place of sustenance, but of connection. Records from explorers describe seeing these gatherings, noting the calm dignity of the exchanges. Unlike the frenzied markets of Europe or Asia, here the pace was slower, attuned to the cycles of sea and forest. The goods exchanged may have seemed modest, but they carried the essence of the environment. Salmon from the rivers, oil from the whales, cedar from the forests, shells from the beaches. Among the stalls, if they could be called that, musicians sometimes played quiet, rhythms on wooden rattles or sang chants that were more like soft murmurs than performances. These sounds blended with the gulls and the waves, creating a music that was inseparable from the place itself. The markets were never noisy. They were orchestras of stillness. Some items traded remain intriguing to scholars. Tiny carved figures, often made of bone or antler, have been found along coastal sites, their exact purpose still uncertain. Were they charms, toys, or tokens of exchange? Historians still debate their meaning, leaving them suspended in mystery, like whispers that linger after a song has ended. For the villagers, meaning was never measured in wealth, but in the quiet. Language of exchange. A basket of berries carried gratitude, a bundle of roots expressed kinship, and a carved wooden spoon became a gesture of trust. Each offering was more than an object. It was a thread woven gently into the fabric of community. Life dot as the day leaned toward afternoon. The sunlight softened, stretching long shadows across the sand. The tide moved patiently, lifting the resting canoes so that their bows swayed like slow, rhythmic breathing. Families lingered even after the trades had ended, their voices low and unhurried. Children played among driftwood pieces, stacking them into tiny shelters that the breeze would soon scatter, while elders gathered in small circles. Their canes, polished by years of touch, rested beside them as they spoke softly, their presence itself a quiet anchor in the rhythm of the shore. The fire within the longhouse had given warmth and comfort, yet the market offered something different: connection, the weaving of lives through exchange. Together, they formed the balance that sustained the community, the hearth for inward reflection, the shoreline for outward sharing. Both were steady, both were patient, both carried the quiet weight of what it meant to be human dot as the evening. Tide began to rise, the small signs of gathering faded. Mats were rolled with care, baskets collected, and goods lifted gently back toward the Cedar homes. The sand, restless under the soft touch of the wind, smoothed itself once more, erasing the footsteps and outlines of the day's commerce. Only the faint grooves left by canoe keels remained upon the beach, waiting for the sea to claim them in its steady embrace. The people walked home unhurriedly. Their arms may have carried woven goods or dried fish, but their true burden was lighter, the calm reassurance that life continued in rhythm. Each trade had been more than necessity. It was a conversation spoken without haste, a gentle reminder of belonging dot, and so the quiet markets endured, not as noisy spectacles of gain, but as gatherings of hearts and hands, flowing like the tide, unhurried, eternal, and deeply human. When the quiet markets of the shore finally folded into Cedar homes, the day yielded to an evening wrapped in tenderness. The sun drifted behind far ridges, leaving the horizon washed in lavender hues and delicate traces of fading gold. One by one, stars appeared, scattered faintly like forgotten shells across the darkening sky. Then, with a steady grace, the moon ascended, its pale glow casting a silver path upon the waters, a bridge of light leading gently from shore to horizon. Serene and unbroken, the shoreline, so filled with voices and gentle commerce in the daylight, softened now into stillness. Canoes rocked faintly at their moorings, the tide breathing a steady rhythm against the sands. Families moved with unhurried steps, gathering driftwood for fires or sitting quietly by the entrances of their longhouses. In this softened space, the rituals of the night began to take shape, woven not with urgency, but with the patience of tradition. History tells us that moonlight held deep meaning for many coastal communities. Ceremonies often followed lunar cycles, with gatherings timed to the fullness of the moon or the dark silence of its absence. Songs were sung not to entertain, but to guide the heart toward stillness, to align the human spirit with the vast, unshifting rhythms of the sea and sky. One of the most carefully remembered rituals along the coast involved the lighting of small fires, placed in a gentle line along the beach. Each flame was tended with deliberate care, and together they formed a luminous pathway of light. Reflected upon the water, the fires shimmered like falling stars, dissolving softly into the tide. Archaeological findings suggest that these gatherings occurred at particular seasons, perhaps to mark shifts in the year, though their complete purpose remains only partly understood. Some scholars suggest guidance, others gratitude, still others remembrance. Yet certainty remains elusive. Closer to the cluster of longhouses, elders moved with patient intent, drawing figures in the sand. Their hands traced slow, deliberate shapes, gestures that felt as though they were writing letters to the moon itself. Children gathered nearby, hushed and observant, encouraged not to speak, but simply to watch, to absorb. These markings, fragile against wind and tide, faded almost as quickly as they appeared. Yet this impermanence was essential. The ritual was not only about creating, but also about releasing, about honoring what was fleeting and letting it return to silence. Fragments of these moonlit practices still linger in oral traditions and in the stone carvings scattered across the coast. Some petroglyphs depict crescent forms resting beside waves, their exact meanings never fully deciphered. Were they calendars of the tides, or quiet memorials of these gatherings? No one can say for certain. What endures is their echo, a reminder of the gentle language spoken between moonlight and water. The ceremonies themselves unfolded without spectacle. A group might sit together in silence, gazing across the silvered waves. Another might prepare, offering small bundles of herbs or carved tokens placed gently upon the sand or into the water. The motions were slow, almost meditative, designed not to impress, but to settle the heart into rhythm with the night. Further along the beach, young men and women sometimes waded into the shallows, dipping cedar branches into the tide and brushing them across their shoulders, a gesture of cleansing and renewal. The water, cool beneath the moon, carried both salt and silence. In the stillness, the gesture became more than a physical act. It was a way of letting the ocean remind them of resilience. Historical records note that whale oil lamps were also part of the nightly rituals. Their flames, steady and golden, cast gentle circles of light upon carved masks or woven mats. These lamps, fed by the gifts of the sea, glowed with a warmth that was more than physical. The people saw in them a living connection, the whale that swam, the hunter that prepared, the community that shared. Yet there were no proclamations, no rigid instructions. Each ritual was fluid, shaped by the needs of the moment. A family might sit together and hum softly, their voices blending with the waves. An elder might share a fragment of a story, his words no louder than the crackle of firewood. The night belonged not to one person, but to the rhythm of all the moon, the tide, the people, the forest shadows, among the more intriguing discoveries. Along these coastal stretches are the quiet remains of small stone circles, set carefully upon certain beaches. Their alignment consistently faced the open water, as though the stones themselves were listening to the sea. Some believe they may have served as ritual sites where offerings were made, while others suggest they were markers to guide travelers across shifting tides, or even simple resting places where lamps once glowed to welcome the night. Their purpose remains uncertain, yet under the soft glow of moonlight, they whisper of gatherings where silence was the truest form of reverence, and where presence alone was the offering dot. As darkness deepened, the shoreline settled into an even gentler rhythm. Fires, once lively, diminished into embers that glowed faintly in the sand. Songs slowed, their voices fading to murmurs barely distinguishable from the hush of the waves. Canoes, pulled into the shallows, rested quietly, their hulls shimmering faintly as moonlight touched the water surface. Children leaned against their parents, lulled by the rhythm of the tide and the glow of fading firelight, surrendering softly to sleep. The moon continued its patient arc across the sky, casting silver across the ocean. The sea answered with its steady voice, a rhythm that seemed older than memory itself. Rituals did not close with abrupt endings, but rather dissolved gradually like salt melting into water, leaving only quiet traces behind. Families returned slowly to their longhouses, carrying with them the assurance that the sea, the moon, and the night would remain constant, guiding life gently forward. Here, moonlit waters were never merely scenery, and rituals were never mere performance. They formed a continuous thread, binding generations with gestures, silences, and shared gazes across the silver tide. The night ended not with conclusion, but with deepening stillness, as if the entire shore had exhaled, settling into the slow breath of the ocean. After the quiet rituals faded into night, the shoreline rested in the embrace of silence. The moon drifted further across the sky, its silver light slowly dimming before the pale glow of dawn. By the time the horizon softened into a misty gray, a new sound joined the rhythm of the wave-soft rain, falling steady and light, pattering against cedar roofs. The village woke, not with haste, but with the hush of morning showers. Drops rolled across the curved shingles of bark, collecting in tiny streams that trickled down the edges of longhouses. The sound was not intrusive. It was soothing, steady, a natural lullaby that seemed to prolong the calm of night. In every corner of the settlement, the cedar wood carried the rhythm of rain, resonant and gentle, like a drum played slowly by unseen hands. History records that the cedar tree held extraordinary importance for these coastal peoples. Its wood shaped their homes, their canoes, their totems, even the mats and baskets woven from its bark. In the rain, cedar released a fragrance both sharp and calming, filling the air with a freshness that seemed to cleanse the spirit. Ancient travelers spoke of villages scented with cedar, their roofs glistening with rain like polished stone. Rainfall itself was seen as a gift, nourishing the forests, replenishing streams, and smoothing the sands along the shore. Many oral traditions speak of rain as a bridge between sky and earth, a reminder of cycles that sustained both people and sea. Some historians still debate whether ceremonies were timed to seasonal rains or whether rain itself was allowed to guide the flow of daily ritual. Inside the longhouses, life unfolded at an unhurried pace. Fires were rekindled from the embers of the night before, smoke curling softly upward into the rafters before finding its way through carved vents. The crackle of wood joined the patter of rain, two rhythms weaving together in quiet harmony. Families gathered around the hearth, not rushing, but moving gently, sharing morning meals of dried fish or warm broth, their voices low, almost blending. Into the rain's soft percussion dot in some records, travelers described longhouse mornings as scenes of calm industry. Women smoothed cedar bark into soft fibers for weaving, their fingers moving with care as rain tapped lightly above. Children sat nearby, shaping small toys from driftwood or listening to stories told in hushed tones. Men repaired nets or carved. Tools, each stroke of the knife measured and unhurried, the rain outside lending steady rhythm to their work. Curiously, some carved cedar planks discovered along the Pacific Northwest coasts show patterns of falling lines, vertical marks etched. With quiet repetition, while interpretations differ, some scholars wonder if these markings symbolized rainfall, a visual tribute to the nourishing cycles that defined life here. Others suggest they were purely decorative, yet the mystery remains, echoing softly like the rain itself. The rain was not only a background sound, but also a presence in daily life. Children stepped outside to feel the cool drops on their faces, lifting cedar branch lids to collect rainwater in hollowed bowls. The water, clear and fresh, was often saved for cooking or cleansing, a small but meaningful practice in harmony with the sky. The village seemed to lean into the rain, accepting its gift with quiet gratitude. Beyond the homes, the forest embraced the showers in its own way. Tall cedars and firs dripped steadily, their needles glistening with tiny beads of water. Ferns and mosses swelled with moisture, their greens deepening into rich hues. Trails darkened but did not muddy, for centuries of needles had cushioned the paths. Walking beneath the canopy during such rains was like stepping into a hushed cathedral, where every drop fell with a note of reverence. The ocean, too, responded to the rain. Its surface darkened under the soft gray sky, each drop forming small circles that spread and vanished into waves. The tide's rhythm seemed to slow, blending with the rain until one could no longer tell which sound belonged to sea and which to sky. Villagers often paused at the shoreline in such mornings, simply standing beneath the drizzle, watching as water returned to water. Historical accounts mention that certain fishing practices were paused during rainfall, not from fear, but from respect. Nets and lines rested, canoes remained pulled onto shore, and the community allowed the ocean to settle beneath the touch of rain. In this way, the people mirrored nature's own rhythm, moments of activity, balanced by moments of stillness. Harvest balanced by waiting. One lesser-known fact is that rain was sometimes used in preparation for carving sacred objects. Fresh cedar, dampened by showers, was easier to shape, its fibers more pliant under careful hands. Stories suggest that some carvers waited for rainy days to begin their most delicate work, listening to the patter on the roof as they guided their blades. The sound itself was said to calm the hand, steadying each motion. Inside the homes, this light was dim and gentle, filtered through rain clouds and drifting smoke from small vents. Candles and oil lamps glowed faintly, casting warmth into the quiet gloom. Shadows moved softly across carved posts and woven mats, flickering in harmony with flame and drizzle. The atmosphere carried patience. Nothing rushed, nothing strained, everything unfolding at its own unhurried pace. As the morning stretched on, rain eased into a tender mist that lingered above the village. Droplets clung to cedar branches, falling only with the lightest breeze. Roofs echoed with a softer rhythm, less steady, as if even the sky was finding rest. The people mirrored this calm, their tasks slowing, their bodies leaning toward midday. Ease. Here, in the sound of rain on cedar, life revealed its essence. Peace within the simplest, most ordinary moments. By the time the clouds began to lift, the village remained unshaken, carrying forward the morning's serenity. The rain had passed, but its calm endured, echoing in every cedar beam, every softened step, every steady breath. And so, the gentle rains became part of the daily rhythm, like tides, like moonlight, like fire. a quiet presence, shaping not just the land but the lives within it, always soft, always patient, always reminding that peace lies in the steady fall of drops upon cedar roofs. As the last of the gentle rain faded into mist, the village stood in renewed stillness. The cedar roofs still glistened with droplets, but the air was lighter now, carrying the faint fragrance of damp earth and wood smoke. Along the edge of the village, where the forest met the shore, stood the tall cedar poles, totem poles, carved by careful hands. Standing in silence as if listening to the world, the poles had weathered countless rains, their surfaces darkened by age, yet their markings remained clear. Figures of animals, birds, and human forms flowed together in vertical harmony, each carved shape layered above the next, telling stories in wood. These poles were not monuments to power or conquest. They were gentle storytellers, keepers of memory, meant to remind rather than to command. Their silence spoke louder than words, steady and eternal in the mist. Historically, totem poles were raised by many indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, each community shaping them with meaning unique to their own traditions. Some told family histories, some honored ancestors, others served as quiet markers of events long past. The cedar tree, so central to life here, gave its strength again in these towering forms, allowing memory to stand tall against wind and tide. Yet mysteries remain. Some ancient poles, found fallen and half-hidden in deep forests, display designs that defy simple explanation, spirals curling like waves, unfamiliar animals carved with quiet precision, and rain-like lines etched into their surface. These markings, though worn by centuries of weather, seem to carry secrets that the present cannot fully unlock. They linger like whispers across time, leaving the poles balanced between the known and the unknowable, inviting wonder as softly as the wind through the trees. In the morning calm, villagers might pass these poles on their way to gather driftwood or tend to nets. They did not rush. Instead, they often paused, letting their eyes travel along the carved figures, taking in each line, each curve. The poles stood not only as reminders, but also as resting points for the spirit, places where thought could slow, where breath could deepen. Carving a totem pole was itself an act of patience. Accounts describe the process lasting months or even years. Cedar was chosen carefully, often with rituals of gratitude. The wood was hollowed, shaped, and slowly brought to life with careful tools. Each stroke carried intention, guided by story and respect. On rainy days, as described in earlier tales, the cedar softened, allowing the carver's hand to move with quiet ease. The sound of blade against wood mingled with the patter of drops, forming a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. The poles also carried colors, though many have since faded with time. Natural pigments of red, black, and blue were applied with care, each hue carrying meaning. Black might signify strength, red could represent life or blood, blue the spirit of sky and water. Even as pigments wore away, the forms remained, their presence still strong in the softened grain of cedar. One lesser known fact is that some poles were never intended to last forever. They were left to return to the earth, falling slowly back into the forest floor. This was not seen as a loss, but as a continuation of life's cycle, wood giving itself back to soil, soil feeding new trees, and new trees offering themselves again in time. In this way, even decay became part of the story, as gentle and natural as the tides. Standing before such poles, one could feel both time's passage and time's stillness. The rain might bead on carved feathers or animal eyes, making them glisten as if alive. Birds sometimes perched on the highest points, their songs mingling with the hush of forest and sea. Children, in moments of play, sometimes pressed their hands against the wood, feeling the grooves, tracing the shapes of creatures told in legend. In their touch, the past and present quietly met. There is a recorded observation from early travelers who, upon seeing these poles for the first time, described them as silent libraries. Though the travelers did not always understand the stories carved within, they recognized that the poles held knowledge, compressed not into words, but into form and figure. Each pole was a chapter, each marking a phrase, each figure a line of poetry. In wood. Mysteries remain, such as poles that were found near old harbors now long abandoned. Some stand with their bases sunk deep into tidal sands, their meaning obscured by time. Did they once mark gathering places? Did they face the ocean as a greeting or as a farewell? No records remain, and so they stand in their silence, open to interpretation, offering peace in their UNKNOWABILITY. As the morning lengthened, sunlight began to break through the mist, casting faint glows across the carvings. Shadows deepened the grooves, making the figures appear to shift and breathe. The villagers, moving with their daily rhythms, did not see this as strange, but as natural, as if the poles themselves participated in the life of the village. Alive in their own quiet way. To rest beneath a totem pole was to feel the patience of cedar, the endurance of art, the flow of stories across generations. The silence surrounding them was not empty, but full of memory, reverence, and calm. Just as the tide whispered rhythms to the shore, the poles whispered steadiness to the heart, and so they remained, tall, still, and enduring, keeping watch through rain and sun, through silence and song. The markings upon them were not simply art, but anchors for the spirit, grounding the people in who they were and where they had always belonged. By the day's end, when fires would be kindled again and the rain might return, the totem poles would still stand. Their stories, old and new, lingered in every line carved into cedar, waiting for each slow gaze, each gentle touch, each quiet moment of remembrance. The markings on the totem poles, like the rains and tides, asked for no rush, no urgency, invited only presence and awareness of time's flow, of life cycles, of stillness woven into wood. In their silence, they offered calm, and in their endurance, they offered peace. Morning mist lingered along the shoreline, curling around weathered stones and driftwood. Beyond the familiar rhythm of the tide, faint outlines began to appear, timbers half buried in sand, worn pilings jutting from shallow water, the quiet remains of harbors once full of life. They did not rise suddenly. They revealed themselves slowly, as though the sea itself whispered their presence with care. These were forgotten harbors, now resting in shadow, where memory and silence mingled in gentle calm. Long ago, such places had been bustling with quiet purpose. Canoes once slid smoothly into the water here, their cedar hulls guided by hands steady and practiced. Nets were lifted ashore, fish laid out upon woven mats, baskets exchanged with neighbors in soft words that carried no urgency. Fires might have burned nearby, warming food and people alike, their smoke trailing upward into skies of shifting gray. The harbor had been a point of meeting, of connection, where village life touched the sea. History records, the trading routes along the Pacific Northwest extended far beyond local shores. Shells from distant coasts, copper from inland, and woven blankets traveled quietly from one harbor to another. Here, too, such exchanges likely unfolded steady, simple, without haste. Canoes arriving, canoes departing, goods passed hand to hand, stories drifting like smoke across the air. Yet mystery remains in the traces left behind. Some harbor pilings bear carved notches, patterns whose function is not clear. Were they markers for tides, or symbols of ownership, or simply ornament? Historians still debate whether these marks carried ritual significance or whether they were mere practical signs. The sea has softened their lines, leaving only hints, a quiet puzzle washed by salt and time. Now, The harbors are no longer places of gathering, but places of stillness. Waves lap gently against stones, seaweed drifts lazily around the old pilings, and seabirds rest upon them as if upon small islands. The sound is hushed, a muted echo of activity long past. Standing here, one feels not absence, but transformation, the busy hum of life giving way to a deep, enduring calm. Villagers of centuries ago may have walked these same sands, carrying baskets or guiding children by the hand. Their footprints vanished with the tides, leaving only memory held in shadow. Yet the structures they built, even in decay, remind us of their presence. Wood weathered into silver gray, stones smoothed by water, all resting quietly in place. There are accounts of harbors discovered far inland, where shifting coastlines have since drawn the sea away. In such places, wooden remains stand amid grass and soil, silent witnesses to a time when water once lapped at their sides. To walk among them is to sense the ocean's absence, an emptiness filled not with sorrow, but with quiet awe at how landscapes change while memory lingers. The harbors also carried rituals of departure and return. Before a whale hunt, before a journey across waters, villagers may have gathered along the timbers to offer words, gestures, or songs. Upon return, whether with success or with loss, they landed again in these same sheltered inlets, greeted by watchful eyes, warmed by fires, waiting nearby. Each harbor thus became more than structure. It became a threshold, a gentle doorway between land and sea. Today, when one gazes upon these remnants, imagination supplies the life that once filled them. The hush of waves could be the echo of paddles dipping. The call of a bird could mirror voices calling across the water. A scent of salt and smoke could be a faint remembrance of meals once shared beside the shore. The harbors remain not empty but layered, each moment of stillness holding countless moments of the past. It is said that some harbors were left intentionally, abandoned as villages moved, as water shifted, as forests claimed the edges once cleared. In their abandonment lay respect, letting wood return to earth, letting tides reclaim their space. There was no resistance, only acceptance, an understanding that life flows onward, and that what remains behind continues in quieter form. Walking. Now among the stones and timbers, one might notice how the sea has made its own patterns. Barnacles cling to wood, seaweed wraps around posts like soft ribbons, crabs scuttle quietly in the shade. Nature has taken what was built and woven it into its own design, not erasing but embracing. The harbor does not resist being forgotten. It simply becomes something else, something gentler. Even in their fading, these harbors offer calm. Their silence is not loss, but rest. They no longer carry the weight of labor or the busyness of exchange. They carry only the rhythm of tide and wind, the softness of shadow, the gentleness of time passing. In their stillness, they remind us of cycles, activity giving way to quiet, presence giving way to memory, memory dissolving into the wider calm of the sea. As the evening deepens, the last light of day softens against the worn timbers of the Thay. Harbor. Shadows stretch long and slender across the water, leaning toward the shore as though reaching for rest. The sun sinks low, tinting the surface of the sea with muted shades of gold and silver, colors that waver quietly in the fading light. What remains feels slower, as if the harbor itself exhales with the coming night, releasing the weight of countless years into the still air. In the distance, small fires glow faintly on the horizon, their flames barely visible, like distant stars, mirrored on the earth. But here, among the ruined pilings and weathered beams, there is only sea and sky. The two join together in silence, forming a vast and tender embrace. These harbors no longer stand in grandeur, no longer bustling with sails or voices, yet their quiet presence is deeply felt. Their shadows carry memory, the rhythm of work, the Weight of journeys, the sound of waves that once greeted returning canoes. They do not demand attention. They simply remain, asking only for recognition and a moment of stillness. The tide will rise again, covering the remnants with gentle care. And in that embrace, these harbors are never truly forgotten, but held as whispers along the shore. The shoreline was hushed now, as if every ripple and grain of sand had grown tired of movement. The long story of the day, its winds, its tides, its quiet villages had drifted into a stillness that asked for nothing more than rest. Center of this gentle silence, a small campfire glowed. Its flames reached only modestly upward, not in a rush, but in a steady, measured way, casting light that did not intrude, only embraced. The air was cool, yet the warmth of the fire spread like a soft blanket, wrapping around all who sat near. This fire was not the first. Long before, countless fires had burned in the Pacific Northwest. They had lit the interiors of wooden longhouses, sending their smoke curling into cedar beams. They had guided returning canoes, placed like beacons on the shore. They had warmed hunters after the strain of the sea. And they had comforted families after quiet labors in market and forest. Tonight's fire belonged to that same lineage. To sit beside, it was to feel the echo of centuries breathing in rhythm with the tide. The shoreline around was empty, but not lonely. The ocean, with its timeless voice, continued its slow chant. Waves touched the sand with patience, retreating and returning as though they, too, wished to stay close to the fire. Above, stars had arranged themselves like beads on a quiet string, faint but steady. The moon, worn and kind, leaned its silver light over the camp, bright enough to reveal outlines of driftwood, stones, and grass. There is comfort in realizing how ordinary these elements are. A piece of wood, a spark, a tide, a star, nothing extraordinary, and yet together they create a sanctuary of calm. Ancient people once depended on this combination for their very survival. Fires were not only warmth, but guardians of the night. Tides were not only rhythm, but providers of food. Stars were not only distant, but guides homeward. Historians still debate whether the circles of stones once found on remote beaches were ritual places or only hearths for simple meals. But in either case, the quiet truth is clear. Such fires were always more than practical. They were a bridge between life and rest. The whale hunts had ended now, tucked into memory with all their perils and their triumphs. The canoes no longer strained against the horizon. The harbors once filled with activity had become shadows. Totem poles, carved with patience, still watched from their forest clearings. The markets by the shore had grown quiet. Gentle rains had fallen. Moonlit rituals had passed, and tides had whispered themselves into stillness. All of it gathered here, folded into the flame's warm glow. A listener by this fire might find their thoughts slowing, their minds softening like wax near the heat. The worries of the present, sharp and restless, melted into the background. What remained were only calm shapes, the memory of a cedar roof listening to rain, the echo of nets lowered silently beneath waves, the shimmer of moonlight on ritual waters. Each image was tender, gentle, unwilling to disturb. They passed through the mind like clouds drifting across the night sky. The fire made no demand, asked no labor. It simply offered its rhythm, the occasional crackle, the release of sparks that climbed upward before dissolving into the sky. It was easy to imagine that the stars themselves had been born of fires like this one, lifted slowly, patiently, until they became eternal lights above. The shoreline's air smelled of salt and wood smoke. Together, they carried the memory of every journey told so far. The salt spoke of tides, of fishing nets, of the whale's return. The smoke spoke of longhouses, of cedar tools, of rituals beside the market fire. The two scents met in the night air like old companions, reminding anyone who breathed them in that the sea and the hearth were never far apart. At times, a breeze rose just enough to bend the flames sideways. They did not resist. They swayed, yielded, and then returned upright again. There was a lesson hidden there, one of patience, of quiet endurance, of strength that did not need to force itself loudly. The people who once lived along these coasts must have learned it too, to bend with the storm, to wait with the tide, to persist with calmness rather than resistance. In the distance, one might almost hear the ghost of paddles dipping into water, or voices low in the evening, or the shuffle of cedar bark carried home. These were not intrusions, only echoes, gentle reminders that the present is never alone. Past lives rest alongside it, close as shadows, soft as dreams. The campfire burned steadily on until its flames grew lower. The wood turned to glowing embers, orange and deep, their heat steady but subdued. It was a perfect hour, not dark, not bright, a moment balanced between presence and disappearance. Now, the campfire rests in its last quiet stage. Its glow is no longer fierce, but soft and enduring, as though it wishes to hold on only long enough to see you safely into sleep. The tide continues its lullaby nearby, steady and infinite, like the gentle breath of the earth itself. All that has unfolded in this long, wandering journey, the ancient villages, the fishing nets, the whale hunts, the cedar rains, the moonlit rituals, the silent harbors, has returned now to stillness. They remain part of the night, but they no longer call for attention. They surround you quietly, like a protective circle of memory. Let the shoreline fade into the distance. Let the forest retreat into shadow. Let the waters dim to nothing. But sound, you need not hold on to them. They are here only to soothe, not to keep. Breathe slowly. Feel the rhythm of the tide, steady and kind. Feel the warmth of the last ember glowing for you. Feel the weight of your body softening, easing into rest. The fire is low, the night is wide, and sleep is close. Good night, dear friend. May your dreams be gentle, your rest be deep, and your spirit be calm. Until we meet again by another quiet fire, with another story told in whispers, sleep well and sleep peacefully.